Welcome back to our news bulletin. We start with Turkey, which says it has largely reached an agreement with Russia on details of a ceasefire in Syria's Idlib region. A Russian delegation is in Ankara discussing the details, including a security corridor and joint patrols on the key M4 highway. Speaking to reporters in Ankara, Defense Minister Hulusi Akar said Turkish forces will maintain their presence on the southern border. He said military-level talks between both the countries are still underway in Ankara. Echoing Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's warnings, Akar said Turkey will continue its military offensive in Idlib if the ceasefire is violated. Last week, Turkey and Russia agreed on the truce to halt an escalation of violence in Idlib. Turkey says it has killed 13 militants from the Kurdistan Workers' Party in northern Syria and Iraq. The Defense Ministry says 8 fighters were killed in Syria's Operation Peace Spring. It said the military killed 5 others in operations backed by air power in Iraq's Metina and Gara regions. The ministry said Turkey will continue to destroy weapon caches and shelters used by the terrorists. It said over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 5 months. Turkey holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year conflict. In the U.S., a Syrian defector has asked Congress to enforce tougher measures against the government in Damascus for its atrocities in the country's war. Codenamed Caesar, the defector smuggled evidence of regime torture out of Syria in 2013, helping prompt new U.S. sanctions. Caesar was speaking to the House of Representatives during a special hearing marking 9 years since the war began. Speaking on existing sanctions, Caesar said more was needed because regime forces still carry out mass killings. He said Damascus sees the lack of a reaction from the international community as a green light to continue its crimes. Responding, the committee's Republican chairman Jim Risch said he is working with the Trump administration on the issue. He said the Syrian people deserve better. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization says over 470 patients in Syria were killed in attacks on medical facilities over the past 4 years. In a report, the UN health body says 494 attacks were carried out in exchange of assaults between Syria's warring sides. The WHO said the Syrian conflict has, for years, been one of the worst examples of violence affecting health care. It said the sites where the sick and wounded are treated have been prohibited under international humanitarian law. The UN Health Agency said the attacks were conducted in Idlib, Aleppo, and Hama provinces. Close to 1 million people have been displaced by the warring sides' offensives. In Iraq, 2 American and a British soldier have been killed in a rocket attack on a military base hosting foreign troops. U.S. military spokesman in Iraq, Colonel Miles Kagan, says 15 small rockets hit the Camp Thaji base used for anti-ISIS training. In a statement, the U.S.-led coalition in Iraq said 12 others were wounded when a barrage of Katyusha rockets hit the base near Baghdad. The Iraqi military said the rockets were fired from the base of a truck. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and British Foreign Minister Dominic Raab have condemned the attack. This is the 22nd such attack against U.S. military interests in the country since late October. We're now going live to Olympic flame lighting in Olympia for the Olympics. This year's Olympics are scheduled to begin on July 24th in Tokyo, known as the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. We are coming to you live from Olympia, where the traditional torch lighting ceremony is taking place for the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, which are scheduled for 24th July in Tokyo. This year, Rio Olympic shooting gold medalist Anna Korakaki has become the first woman to be the torch bearer. It has been lighted, as you can see on the visuals of your screen. Coming to you live from Olympia. This is a traditional torch lighting ceremony which is taking place Olympic shooting gold medalist Anna Korakaki is the first woman to be the torchbearer in this year's ceremony. After lighting and holding the torch up front, this marks that the ceremony has begun in Olympia for the Olympics 2020, scheduled for 24th July in Tokyo. Officials say Japan's 2004 Olympic marathon champion Mizuki Noguchi will be the second torchbearer. We were coming to you live from Olympia, where the Olympic traditional torch lighting ceremony was taking place. Now, going back to the bulletin, the U.S. House of Representatives has approved a resolution to limit President Donald Trump's ability to wage war against Iran. With a handful of Republicans, the House voted 227 to 186 in favor of the legislation, which now goes to the White House for the president's approval. The measure means Trump must ask for congressional approval before engaging in further military action against Iran. Supporters of the resolution said they wanted to ensure Congress has a unique power to declare war, as outlined in the U.S. Constitution. Democrat Senator Tim Kaine, who introduced the resolution, said if Trump is serious about his promise to stop endless wars, he should sign it into law. It is virtually certain that Trump will veto the legislation, and coalition of Democrats and a few Republicans lacks votes to override him. The U.S. has accused Iran of not sharing detailed information regarding one of its sites with the International Atomic Energy Agency. In a statement to the IAEA's Board of Governors meeting, Washington alleged that Tehran is stockpiling uranium at the site. The U.S. said Iran has refused to address the agency's questions regarding possible undeclared uranium at a heavily sanitized location. Earlier, IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi said Iran's refusal to give UN nuclear inspectors access to certain sites is a serious matter. Grossi said the UN nuclear watchdog was only requesting the access under existing protocols. Rejecting the allegations, Tehran has argued that the IAEA's suspicions are based on fabricated Israeli intelligence. U.S. Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad says he hopes intra-Afghan talks will conclude in 100 days. Peace talks between the Taliban and Kabul were scheduled to start on March 10th, but delayed over prisoners' release issue. In a TV interview, Khalilzad said the U.S. wants this issue to be resolved during the first phase of the troops' withdrawal. The special envoy clarified the withdrawal of all U.S. troops from Afghanistan in 14 months is conditional. He said the Taliban and Kabul need to compromise for a political settlement to end the war in Afghanistan. Khalilzad said there are signs of the start of intra-Afghan dialogue, but all parties involved can only celebrate after it is completed. The UN has called on Afghan politicians to create a comprehensive government that is acceptable to everyone. UN Special Envoy Tajamiti Yamato met with former Chief Executive Abdullah in Kabul. During the meeting, Yamamoto urged Abdullah to work towards a reconciliatory process which can resolve the political crisis. He said the current standoff between Abdullah and President Ashraf Ghani needs to be resolved in line with the Afghan constitution. Earlier this week, Abdullah and Ghani both sworn themselves in as presidents of Afghanistan. Ghani is backed by the Election Commission and the US, while Abdullah enjoys the support of Rashid Dostum. President Donald Trump has suspended travel from Europe to the U.S. for the next 30 days in a bid to stop the spread of new coronavirus. Speaking from the Oval Office, the president called the decision the most aggressive and comprehensive effort to confront a foreign virus in modern history. Trump said the ban will not include travelers from the United Kingdom, which recently left the European Union. This report has details.
While China is bottling the new coronavirus monster with only 15 new cases in the past 24 hours, the West is now struggling to contain the infection. Hundreds of new cases across Europe and the US have prompted panic measures, while Washington, D.C.'s mayor has declared a state of emergency. US President Donald Trump imposed sweeping new travel restrictions on Europe, accusing the bloc of failing to deal with the virus.
After consulting with our top government health professionals, I have decided to take several strong but necessary actions to protect the health and well-being of all Americans. To keep new cases from entering our shores, we will be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States for the next 30 days. The new rules will go into effect Friday at midnight.
The number of fatalities continues to climb in Italy and Iran, while all of Europe is gradually moving towards a virtual shutdown. With 124 countries and territories now affected by COVID-19, the World Health Organization has declared the outbreak a pandemic.
WHO has been assessing this outbreak around the clock, and we're deeply concerned both by the alarming levels of spread and severity and by the alarming levels of inaction. We have therefore made the assessment that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
Oscar-winning actor Tom Hanks and his wife, actress Rita Wilson, have both tested positive for the new coronavirus in Australia. The film star says he and Wilson will be isolated, observed, and tested for as long as required.
Meanwhile, India has announced all visas barring a select few categories will be suspended for a month to halt the spread of coronavirus. Visa-free travel of Indian citizens overseas of the country has also been suspended until 15th April. Under the advisory, visas for international organizations, employment and projects and diplomatic visas are exempt from ban. It said all incoming travelers, including China, Italy and Iran, Korea, February 15th shall be quarantined for at least 14 days. Earlier, the Indian Health Ministry said India has 73 confirmed cases of the deadly virus. Karnataka state has invoked a 123-year-old legislation to ensure patients do not run away from being treated at hospitals. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. World rights bodies have called for action to end the grave human rights situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir. In a joint statement at the UN, International Commission of Jurists, Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International highlighted Indian atrocities in the valley. They said 3 former chief ministers and pro-freedom leaders remain in detention under controversial Public Safety Act. The international bodies asked Delhi to ensure free access of independent observers and foreign journalists to carry out their work without fear. They asked Indian government to release everyone detained without charge and remove restrictions on rights to freedom of expression and of movement. They urged the UN to establish an independent international investigation mechanism into crimes in Kashmir. The valley has been reeling under Indian curfew and communications blackout for 221 days. In India, ruling Bharatiya Janata Party has ambushed the democratically elected government of its opposition in the state of Madhya Pradesh. After a one-on-one meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's right hand Amit Shah, Congress's top leader Jyotiraditya Scindia and 22 of his loyalists resigned. The defection is highly likely to topple the Congress government in Madhya Pradesh state. After a day of high drama in the state, Scindia joined the ruling party after meeting Prime Minister Narendra Modi a day earlier. On Monday, the drama began when at least 17 Congress legislators said to be loyal to Scindia resigned and went incommunicado. Since Scindia's resignation, 5 more Congress legislators have resigned, but the Speaker has not accepted any of the 22 resignations. Last year in July, BJP grabbed the Karnataka state in similar fashion after toppling opposition alliance government. Global media watchdog Reporters Without Borders has added India to the list of digital predators stifling free speech. In a report, RSF named countries which use digital technology to spy on and harass journalists, jeopardizing access to news. In the report, the body included Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's trolls for calls for rape and death threats to journalists. It also identified Indian Ministry of Home Affairs for limiting access to information by disconnecting the internet in occupied Kashmir. It said Hindutva supporters are trying to purge all manifestations of the so-called anti-national thought from the national debate. The body said online harassment campaigns are particularly virulent when the targets are women. Russia says all sides have agreed to endorse a new mechanism for settling the Donbas conflict to its next meeting on March 25th. At the meeting in Minsk, the trilateral group backed agreements on preparing for the disengagement of forces and a prisoner swap in the near future. The deputy chief of the Russian presidential staff, Dmitry Kozak, said they also agreed on cooperation to find political solutions for settling the conflict. He described the Minsk meeting as constructive, saying he hopes the next meeting of the contact group will make a final decision. Kozak said the new proposal is aimed at creating a dialogue platform involving countries of the Normandy format and conflicting sides. Fighting between Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed fighters in Donbas has killed more than 30,000 people since 2014. Iran has agreed to send black boxes from a downed Ukrainian jetliner to Kiev for analysis. Tehran has until now refused to hand over the flight recorders of the jet it shot down on January 8th, killing all 176 people on board. Aviation official Farhad Parvarish said Tehran has also invited other interested countries to participate in data reading. Responding to the development, Canadian Foreign Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne called it a step in the right direction. Talking to media, Champagne said it will transfer the boxes to France if need be. Ukrainian ambassador to Canada Andriy Shevchenko said Iran's announcement is an important result. 4 teenagers have been stabbed in East London, the latest in the country's string of knife attacks. Police say 3 of the victims have non-life-threatening injuries, while the condition of the 4th victim is unclear. Police say they have arrested 7 people on charges ranging including violent disorder, affray, and possession of an offensive weapon. Police have now been given additional stop and search powers across Walthamstow, Leighton, and Leonstone. Scotland Yard said there was no risk to members of the public and say it was an isolated incident. In France, hundreds of lawyers have protested at the Paris Opera against the government's pension reforms. The protest was supported by the opera's orchestra. Protesting in the French capital, lawyers said the pension reforms are dismantling the social state. They said the court's €7 billion budget is tiny compared to the rest of the state. The demonstrators said there are neither enough judges nor enough court clerks. Lawyers have been protesting for months, joining nationwide strikes against the pension reform bill. In Chile, students have ramped up anti-government protests as the country marks 3 decades of democracy. The protesters in the streets of Santiago clashed with police, marking a day of civil disobedience and calling for the president to resign. President Sebastián Piñera has been under fire for the strong police response to the protests, including the use of tear gas. Earlier this week, the beating of an elderly protester by a police officer shocked the nation, with citizens calling for justice. Meanwhile, addressing an event at the presidential palace, Piñera said Chile must combat violence and care for democracy. He said the country must learn from the lessons of the past 3 decades as well as the past 5 months.
Personal de carabineros.
Personnel from the police force brutally and sadistically beat an elderly person in Santiago who was on the ground, defenseless, who represented no threat. This undoubtedly is another typical case of police abuse, of the police brutality that we have expected and which should be sanctioned and punished.
Típico.
In Turkey, the ancient town of Hasankeyf, which has stood on the banks of the Tigris River for 12,000 years, is slowly drowning every day. The town, widely seen as a jewel of human history, will soon be a victim of the Lisu Dam project. More in this report.
Hasankeyf is a city under threat. This 12,000-year-old settlement in eastern Turkey is sinking under the waters of the Tigris River, rising ever higher as a result of a controversial dam project. Its residents are trying to salvage what they can as they question what future commercial opportunities will remain.
I used to work in the tourism industry. I sold pamphlets. I told the story of this place. But unfortunately, in the last few months, no one has come here except journalists.
Some locals try to focus on the benefits the dam will bring to other parts of the region's economy, which they feel has been neglected by the Turkish government in the past.
Above all, it's good for the energy sector and for power generation. But it will also be useful and beneficial for agriculture.
The Ilisu hydroelectric dam is destined to become the second largest in the country, a huge project that has displaced many into the new Hasankeyf. For the project's critics, the dam will not only swallow up a historic city, but also erase part of the identity of this Kurdish-majority region.
When you look at the landscape, it's a clear destruction of history that we're witnessing. Did Turkey really need that dam? We keep asking that question.
With the canyon encased in concrete and water engulfing this historical landmark a little more every day, many wonder what Hasankeyf will look like tomorrow.
Stock markets in Europe have crashed following the announcement of President Donald Trump's travel ban to US from European countries. The travel ban decision sent European leisure and airline stocks crumbling. Frankfurt's DAX is trading over 7% lower after Lufthansa stocks plummet about 12%. CAC 40 in Paris is trading about 7% lower as Air France KLM led the airline losses, falling over 14%. London's FTSE 100 has lost 6.5% as cinema operator Cineworld created by over 26%, while British Airways plummets over 10%. In Asia, Nikkei 225 led the losses, closing nearly 4.5%. Seoul's Kospi and Hong Kong's Hang Seng lost over 3.5%. Meanwhile, international Brent crude oil price has lost over 5.5% as oil price war continue to batter oil market. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.